Hello, this is Special of the Ages. This video is going to be a tournament report of the Showcase Challenge that happened this past Sunday, March 6th. I ended up in 14th place in this tournament, and some folks asked for a video, so here we are. I haven't done one in a while, and there's been a lot of changes in Enchantress world. So, talking about, I guess, generally the past year or so. Basically, I'm going to start with Modern Horizons 2, so that gave us Sithis, Harvest's Hand. There were some other cards in there as well that some people were interested in, like Sanctum Weaver especially, but I think that's just not really a legacy card. I think it's more of a modern addition to the deck. Obviously, Modern Horizons 2 sort of ported Enchantress into Modern. But Sithis has been really, really strong. Before she was printed, I was actually kind of leaning in a direction of just going away from white almost entirely in Enchantress. I didn't feel like the things you were getting from it were very strong. But she is phenomenal. So she's 1 green, 1 white. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, gain a life and draw a card, 1/2. So she's another Enchantress effect. She is granted super fragile and legendary, but she herself is a 2-mana creature and an enchantment. And the life gain is also a lot more relevant than it might immediately appear. Certainly against aggressive decks, as well as decks like Delver, for example, as well as decks that rely on things like Merit Lage, where the difference between being at 20 or 21 life is rather significant. So she's been really strong. I think no matter what version of Enchantress you're on, you should just be running 4 Sithis. Next up that year we got Paladin class from Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, which is an interesting little enchantment. It's a class enchantment, which means it has sort of an initial mode, and then you can pay mana, activate an ability, and get additional benefits from it. The first two are the most relevant abilities by far, so you pay 1 white mana, and spells your opponent's cast during your turn cost 1 more to cast. This card has been really impactful in the fair blue matchups. Obviously, it hits things like Force of Will, Daze, etc., but it also, maybe less obviously, hits things like Brainstorm, Snapcaster Mage, Abrupt Decay, Lightning Bolt. It just really limits the things that the opponents can do during your turn, which is very significant. It also notably is very useful against Hull Breacher, which is, of course, a huge problem for this deck, and unfortunately has seen a rather significant uptick in play. If you get this out before the Hull Breacher, they can't surprise you with it, so you know whether they have it or not. If they have 4 mana, but playing on curve. You get this out, and then they can't surprise you with it, and it's harder for them to protect their Hull Breacher, especially if you get multiple, or this plus something like Destiny Spinner, where they would have to remove the Destiny Spinner and then counter it on Thin Ice, for example. The second ability is Glorious Anthem. Creatures you control get +1/+1. While it's not necessarily hugely relevant, we're still generally winning big and not through like incremental damage. It does matter in terms of things like pumping an Argothian to get an attack on a Planeswalker, or a Monarch token emblem, or to put Argothian Enchantress out of Plague Engineer range, or End the Festivities range, to put Sithis out of the two. I forget the name of the one red mana Delirium burn spell that that Delver is often playing. And so these two abilities generally are pretty useful. It also gets Destiny Spinner out of Bolt range. That's another thing. And then the third ability is just sort of icing on the cake. It just says whenever you attack until end of turn, one of your attacking creature that you have to target, so it can't hit Argothian, gets +1/+1 for every other attacking creature and gains double strike. So you can kill very quickly with this card, and for example, a single activation of Destiny Spinner, where in another situation you might need a second land that you don't have untapped for Destiny Spinner. So generally I've been very happy with this card. There is a sort of, actually, like almost immediately later, where immediately after, rather, we got a kind of side grade Curse of Silence. So 1 white mana aura that enchants a player. It's a curse. So when it enters the battlefield, you choose a card name, and it costs them 2 more to play that card. And when they do play the card, you can choose to sacrifice curse and draw a card. So theoretically, you could play this main deck because, you could always name something like Brainstorm or Force of Will. I found that to not be very true, and maybe part of that is also the rise of Prismatic Ending, which is just, if this card is relevant, they can end in it, and if it's not, then it's not. So while it's very good against combo, obviously, you can name like Show and Tell, Doomsday, Allurin, or what have you. I found it to be a lot less flexible than I had hoped it would be, so I'm sticking with Paladin class. A little bit after that, we got Hallowed Haunting. I've played as many as 3 of these. For various reasons, I'm down to 1 now. It is a 4 mana enchantment, so it is expensive. It's basically an upgrade, not a strict upgrade, but a general upgrade to Sigil of the Empty Throne, which is a card I haven't played much ever. I just think 5 mana really effectively. Sigil is a 6 mana card, right? Because you have to have at least 1 mana free to cash in on it. Hallowed Haunting being 1 mana less is really significant. It just requires a lot fewer resources to get it going. The creatures it creates do not have flying intrinsically. They have power and toughness are each equal to the number of spirits you control, and they are spirits. So they are vulnerable as well to Dress Down. And it itself grants flying and vigilance to all your creatures if you have 7 or more enchantments, which if you get going isn't very difficult to accomplish. And that does give flying and vigilance to, for example, like elemental tokens or Gloomshrieker. So speaking of Gloomshrieker, Kavigama brought us several new toys, some of which are not in this list. For example, notable exclusions. Swift Reconfiguration is a new card that enables Enchantress to play an infinite mana combo, which is very interesting. I haven't been able to test it because Swift Reconfigurations aren't in the base Kavigama set, and they're extremely difficult to find, at least right now. So I can't speak to that combo. There's also Boseiju, which was probably the single most hyped card from the set, which I did test initially and then sold it again because I didn't think it would retain the value that it's currently at, somewhere around 40 ticks. I just don't think it's actually that relevant in most games of Magic. It's obviously a lot better if you're playing Life from the Loam, but it's just a little bit overhyped in my opinion. The fact that Boseiju Who Endures is a land, you can channel it for 1 green and 1 colorless, destroy target artifact or enchantment or non-basic land, and that permanent's controller searches their library for a card with a basic land type and puts it into play. So the fact that it ramps the opponent is quite significant, and that unlike Assassin's Trophy, it can get non-basics as long as they're dual lands and have a land type. So, well, obviously situationally very powerful against things like Omnitel, notably, or I don't know, Mycosynth Lattice perhaps. Or Chalice of the Void. It's still not that powerful in the majority of games. So I might eventually play one in the sideboard, but it's certainly not a main deck card in my opinion, unless you're on Life from the Loam. Okay, so the cards that we did include from Kawigama. Gloomshrieker, as I mentioned. So this is basically an Eternal Witness that is an enchantment, which is very strong. It has Menace, which is actually, it's very strange, but it's very useful. It's better evasion than flying is in this format because of things like Baleful Strix, obviously Murktide Regent, Icewind Coatl, Endurance. Gloomshrieker, having Menace means it can threaten Planeswalkers a lot more effectively than if it had, well, obviously no evasion or if it had flying. It gets back any permanent card, right? So that's basically everything in the deck. And then if it would die, exile it instead. So I've been very happy with it. It's, it's been, what, 20 years? Everybody knows Eternal Witness. So Doesn't require that much explanation. It's just a tribal Eternal Witness, which has been very useful. The other thing is something that kind of passed me by at first. I don't know. I think some other people maybe cottoned on to it faster than I did. But Commune with Spirits is a really cool addition. It's a 1 green sorcery. You look at the top 4 cards of your library, reveal an enchantment or a land card, and put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this is effectively an Enchantress Ponder, by which I mean that in the early game it can find you land drops, and later on it can convert to business spells. It does have the downside of revealing the card, but it also actually digs deeper, at least for lands, than Ponder does, because Ponder lets you see 3 cards, then you shuffle, you draw a random card. This gets to go past the 4th one, and if you miss, you get the 5th card, which also is more likely to be a land because there are 4 non-lands on the bottom now. It obviously has a lot of deck building constraints, but I found it to be very effective against basically every deck that's not a Chalice deck. Obviously it's quite weak to Chalice since there's the only card in the deck that can't be forced through a Chalice with Destiny Spinner. So that's the main deck. Since Ragavan got banned, I'm still running 4 on Thin Ice. This is from the first Modern Horizons set, and this has largely replaced Elephant Grass, which I still like Elephant Grass, but the metagame I don't think is quite in a place where it is that good anymore. It does require changes to the mana base running on Thin Ice, like you need a basic Plains realistically. And for a while under Ragavan, I was running 4 Windswept Heath and 4 Prismatic Vista. I've diversified the fetches, partially because black is... it's more important to get black on curve now, so I want more fetches that can find Bayou. And then in the sideboard there is also a tropical island. So those are the reasons for that. For this tournament in particular, I switched the 3rd Wild Growth for a Carpet of Flowers, just because I anticipated a lot of Delver and blue decks because it's a tournament that people are trying to win. I've switched to the 1 Hallowed Haunting largely because of Commune, so I can be more likely to find it when I need to. If it gets countered, I can get it back with Gloomshrieker. And the same reasoning applies to going down to 1 Seraph Sanctum. If it gets wastelanded, I can get it back with Gloomshrieker. And I don't want the Sanctums generally until, turn 4 or so, sometimes turn 3. Last thing is Cast Out. So I've been running this for a little while in place of Oblivion Ring. There are 3 main arguments for it. The main argument against it, obviously, is it's 4 mana instead of 3 mana for Oblivion Ring, which is relevant. However, the upsides, I think, are worth it. So 1, it just cycles for 1 mana, which is relevant when you just need it to get out of the way and find you land. And it also works well with Gloomshrieker because you can just cycle the Cast Out and get it back when you need it with Gloomshrieker. It has Flash, which is very relevant against things like Merit Lage in particular, as well as Narset. And it's just a variety of things. It lets you like pass and be ready for a surprise if they're, if they're acting suspicious and leaving their mana open and they're going to do something to blow you out. You can at least have Cast Out available. And thirdly is actually the 4 mana being a upside specifically against Prismatic Ending. I suppose also Abrupt Decay, but that card has sort of dramatically declined in play. Prismatic Ending, it's just harder for it to hit this, so that's relevant. Let's talk about the sideboard. So, again, I anticipated a lot of blue. I thought there would probably be some Death and Taxes, a fair bit of 8 cast. That's a very powerful deck right now. Some Reanimator, most likely. And then probably some various Merit Lage decks. So, Caracas is good against both Death and Taxes and Merit Lage decks, as well as decks that might be running Leovold. I will also bring in Caracas in place of a Forest versus a control deck that does not appear to be playing Wasteland or Back to Basics necessarily. If just because that way it can protect Sithis, which means that it's harder for them to just let her resolve, because then they need to remove spells to kill her. Leyline of the Void is obviously just against Reanimator. You could run Fairy Macabre in this spot. I've done that sometimes. It depends on how likely you think they are to be playing Serenity and other enchantment removal, which tends to be a cyclical thing. So, I don't think there's a permanent correct answer to this. A split is also possible. So against the artifact decks, I was playing a 4-color version for a while, and I found Energy Flux just to be devastating against them. And in a way that, for instance, Stony Silence is not. Stony Silence doesn't kill constructs or Ornithopter tokens, and they can also they play bounce, so they can, untap, bounce it, and just go about their turn as if you never played the Stony Silence. Energy Flux, on the other hand, if this resolves, it goes to their turn, and, because they're tapping out every turn. That's it. It's too late, right? The upkeep has happened. These triggers are on the stack, even if they bounce it. And it's just basically a Shatter Storm every single turn. The first turn they can save a couple of things, but, what are they going to save that's all that scary on its own? Like, I guess Kappa Cannoneer now is really the only one. And their ability to, maximize on it is going to be dramatically reduced without all the other artifacts to provide mana or affinity. So, this card is really, really good, and in my opinion, worth just splashing for. So I've got the Tropical Island in the sideboard for it. 2 chokes against, control and sometimes Delver. And, also it's your main game plan if you are unfortunate enough to be paired against Doomsday. You can just try to steal it with choke. Although, that's not very likely to work. But a lot of the combo decks that, are our worst matchups, you can steal games with chokes, so there's that. Doomwake Giant, this slot has also been Engineered Plague. Engineered Plague is better against Elves, Doomwake Giant is better against Death and Taxes, so I just went with the Giant. Giant is also better against Grixis control. It's actually kind of hard for them to answer it. They only have Edict effects. I can bring it in against Grixis control, which has seen a surge in popularity with the printing of Hitagetsu Consumes All. Last is this card, also from Kawigama, which I'm experimenting with, but I've liked it a fair bit. Touch the Spirit Realm. It's basically a Oblivion Ring. It's an Oblivion Ring that cannot hit enchantments or planeswalkers, so obviously that's not ideal, but it has a couple upsides. It has Channel. You can discard it to exile an artifact or creature and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next in-step. This is very powerful in that A, it's uncounterable, unless they have Stifle, and B, there are a lot of things in the format that this is very much worth doing against. So one obvious one is Merit Lage, as well as a Germ token that's equipped with, say, Cauldron Complete. A Construct token is also possible. An Ether Vial that has gotten up pretty high and needs to be reset. A Chalice of the Void. So it's very powerful, especially against A-Cast when you hit Chalice, because that means it comes back with 0 counters, and their 0 mana artifacts will be countered from now on, which is very good. It can also hit Archon of Valor's Reach out of Elves, which is a card that you otherwise really don't have answers to. And then lastly, and one of the main reasons that I wanted to try it was it can hit Hull Breacher with Days Undoing on the stack. The Hull Breacher will be exiled. It will return at the end of your next turn because it will go immediately to your turn. You won't have Hull Breacher in play, and you'll have a turn where, the door is open and you've got 7 fresh cards. So, and then against Delver, I've been bringing them in just kind of in place of the cast out, just a slightly cheaper removal, because unless they've got Narset, they don't really have anything worth hitting that's not a creature. So that's the list. Let's get into it. Alright, we are in game 1, round 1. We are on the play. So this hand, I probably wouldn't keep it on the draw, but because it's quite slow. On the play, though, I think it's a not remarkable keep. You would be pretty justified, I think, in mulling it, but Notably, the Commune here looks quite good because we do have one of our few non-basics in hand. So we have only one waste-proof land, but Commune can help us with that situation. It also gives us a turn 1 play that's better than just cycling a cast out. Another reason that this hand is slow, besides the obvious lack of wild growth or Utopia Sprawl, is that it only has Sithis and Destiny Spinner for turn 2 plays, both of which can be killed by 1 mana removal. That's quite common in the format. Sithis in particular, you really don't want to... You generally need to treat her as a 3 mana spell where you play her with 1 mana open and an enchantment in hand, so you can immediately cantrip off of her. And if she dies in response, which she very often will, you still get value out of her. That's how you should generally be playing her. If you have a ton of threats in hand, if you just really need to not, if that's just really your only action for the turn, and it's a matchup where you can't afford to just pass a turn not doing anything, or it's a matchup where you don't expect a lot of removal, in those cases you can just play her out on 2. But generally I would advise against it. Okay, so we commune, we get to see, this is obviously a pretty weak commune, right? So we have 8 misses in the deck, 7 once you cast the commune, right? Because it obviously can't hit itself. So having only a selection of 2 is pretty weak. However, we did find what we really wanted, which was land. So that's acceptable. We will pass to the opponent, who plays basic Mountain Dragon's Rage Channeler. So DRC, you do obviously tend to think blue-red Delver, which there was a lot of in this tournament, and I certainly played against a lot of it. The basic Mountain is quite strange because this is obviously, like, we are free to play without fear of days in this situation, which is not really what the Delver player wants us to be able to do. So kind of a strange deck building choice. What we can do here, Utopia Sprawl was a good pickup because it means that we will be able to play it on white. Next turn, if we don't get Wastelanded, we have Cast Out. If we do get Wastelanded, then they still don't have any blue mana. I'm still kind of assuming that they're Delver. We can play a Sithis with an enchantment if we draw a land around days. We can do whatever. It will obviously at that point depend on, if we get Wastelanded, it will depend on what our draw for next turn is. But Utopia Sprawl, a pretty good pickup. We will just lead with the spinner. It actually gets forced, pitching a Murktide. So I mean, obviously the opponent is on blue now. That's quite an interesting decision because it tells us with pretty near certainty that they don't have Lightning Bolt, because otherwise they could just Lightning Bolt her. So, I mean, that's good for Sithis and her chances of sticking around. Opponent plays a Volk. I wonder if that was their card for the turn. But, I mean, would you really keep a no island hand? I don't know. Maybe they just thought, they saw the Commune and thought I might be on, if this was their only blue source, maybe they thought I was on the 8 Mulch deck. Some lists have actually, that I've seen, have actually been running Commune with Spirits, like a couple of them, in that deck, because it's mostly lands and then like Mana Bond and stuff, so maybe that was why they played the basic Mountain out. We drew Paladin class for the turn. That's a great pickup. We'll go get our basic island here, and be able to Sithis into Paladin class, assuming they don't have Force of Will in their remaining 3 cards, which they do. So that's not ideal, but they are basically Hellbent. And we do have Cast Out online. They did draw a 3rd Force of Will, but they might not even have a blue card at this point. Okay, so we do get to take out the Flip Delver. So their last unknown card was Pyroblast, which is obviously great for us. That's a dead card. They mill a land with Dragon Rage Channeler. We do get to cast out their Flip Delver, which is more important at this point. We are staring down 2 potential threats, and we're getting to the middle of our life. So we want to take pressure off the board, and the DRC hasn't hit Delirium yet. Okay, we will hit it again now. We do have the Abundant Growth in hand, but I'm going to prioritize using my mana and saving these cheap enchantments for once we draw an Enchantress. I'm also saving the Paladin class, well, partially for mana reasons, but also you can play Paladin class out in advance in some situations, but it's also good to hold on to allow the opponent to tap out for something like an Expressive Iteration or a Planeswalker, and then you Paladin class, and if they don't force that, then your turn is free. So we found Commune, that's a decent draw. We found Gloomshrieker. So Commune, I think already performing pretty well. Gloomshrieker, a good pickup, but unfortunately with the double white, we don't have the ability to cast her this turn. Like even if we use this green to turn the plains into an Abundant Growth, we're still short. So, well, I guess we could draw a green source, but I'd rather hold on to the Abundant Growth if possible. So, because we can't cast the Gloomshrieker this turn, which would have been ideal, what we can do is just play out the Paladin class and the Abundant Growth, and then have the Gloomshrieker for next turn. The Abundant Growth, like, it would be nice to be able to hold it, but also they're on Blue-Red Delver now for certain, and our black source is this Bayou, so if we hold on to the Abundant Growth, a Wasteland puts us back yet another turn for Gloomshrieker. We have to use our green to convert that, and then etc., etc. So let's get the Abundant Growth out. See what that draws. Okay, so the Commune will be a better play generally than the Paladin class. We'll hold on to the Paladin class. We found another Sithis, that's good. So now we have Sithis and Gloomshrieker. Okay, and Enchantress has stuck. We can now begin converting cards. They don't have Lightning Bolt in response. Great, and we found the one of Carpet. Fantastic. So I unthin Ice here, which walks into their days, as I recall, but honestly, it's fine. We're at 16 life now. This thing still hasn't flipped. We have Carpet in play and Sithis. I was mainly trying to use my mana and draw as many cards as possible. So Sithis has died now, but we do have Gloomshrieker to get her back, as well as Hallowed Haunting and Carpet in play. They opt to not play that Volcanic Island, so they have a Volcanic Island in hand, and one unknown. So they can't really do anything about this Hallowed Haunting. We'll just get a bunch of spirits, well, one spirit and a Gloomshrieker for right now. They bounce the Gloomshrieker, which is huge value for us. They just, I guess, have nothing else going on. And they had to tap out for that as well, so just the game is obviously over at this point. So Hallowed Haunting didn't necessarily have to be Hallowed Haunting there. Almost any threat really would have taken over the game at that point. You know, another Enchantress effect, for example. Having the bodies on board sort of negates whatever remote outs they could have had, but the game was pretty much over at that point. Sithis' life gain definitely showing its power, which, as I said in the beginning, her life gain has been really powerful, especially in the Blue-Red Delver matchup. So, spoiler warning, I'll play Delver a few times, and to be honest, my sideboarding plan against them is not 100% consistent. On one general principle is that on the draw, I don't like days nearly as much as I like it on the play versus Delver. So on the draw, I'll have either 0 or 1, and on the play, I'll have 1 or 2. And on the draw, I'll be more likely to leave in 1 or 2 of the cast outs, even though they're very expensive, just because removal is very good against them. You know, most lists now are just running. Actually, I guess it's running a little bit similar to Death Shadow, and you know, removal is really good against them, right? They're just running 1-for-1 threats, right? They don't garner any real advantage. Like DRC garners some advantage, but it's not actual card advantage. It's sort of incidental to that. So just 1-for-1 spot removal is very effective, and they don't really have great answers for it. So that's why the cast outs, although they're very expensive, and easy to daze. That's one argument for keeping them in. I will obviously bring in all 3 touches consistently against the Delver matchup. And then another, like, some other cards that can get cut are just other high-end stuff, like the Hollow Taunting, or maybe a Gloomshrieker, just other top curve stuff. There's, like, even an argument for an Enchantress's Presence to go. So this hand is good, despite not having an Enchantress. It does have a lot of mana to develop our board, and double acceleration if we get dazed. We would actually like to be dazed with a hand like this. Spinner will need to be dealt with, and any way they deal with it, because they're not a white deck, they're not running Swords of Plowshare, is a way that will enable Gloomshrieker to get her back. So we're missing an Enchantress, but we have 10 of those plus the 4 Communes. We're likely to run into one, and a lot of what else we're running is just removal. So one more note about the sideboard is that if they're on Young Pyromancer, which isn't very common right now, you can consider Doomwake Giant. I suppose the same is true for True Name Nemesis as well. Okay, I ran out the Wild Growth because if they do have days, I'd rather lose the Wild Growth than lose the color fixing potential of Utopia Sprawl. Okay, so they revealed Force with Delver, and then they ran out like a bunch of creatures rather than like leave Delver in hand, so they have Force. So our spinner is resolving, and unless they top deck Lightning Bolt, isn't dying immediately. And then we can, well, we know they don't have days, I suppose, anyway, but we can remove the flip Delver. And the spinner is likely to become an obstacle. Even if the Delver flips, they're unlikely to also flip the DRC. Okay, instead she just walls them for a turn. And now, even if they drew a blue card, we have spinner. So Argothian is resolving. They could have end the festivities, but we'll just draw a bunch of cards in the meantime. Okay, Expressive Iteration, not very scary. You know, if they're not already ahead, them spending a turn to cast Expressive Iteration is generally going to be very good for us. You know, that's a turn where they're pretty tapped out and they can't do things very easily around, for example, Paladin class. And this game's over. We are also at 19 life. Narset is way too late to this party. We can just kill her straight up. But we actually just have lethal on board with 1 elemental, 12 plus 2 plus 1. That's lethal. Alright, round 2. Okay, we're in round 2, game 1. We won the die roll again. So, this hand needs another land, a Utopia Sprawl or Wild Growth, another mana source in order to be keepable. If pretty much any of these had been that, it would have been a very strong hand. But as it is, we're going to have to mulligan because we don't... Honestly, even if one of these had been Commune with Nature, Commune with Spirits, I probably would have kept it because that would give us effectively 5 shots at top decking a land, unless it's the land with Sarah Sanctum, which would be very high odds, and I would still take that shot, I think, with a hand this good. But we've got to mulligan it, unfortunately. This hand, at first blush, looks really good, and if this Wild Growth were Utopia Sprawl, it probably would be. But unless we get a Savannah, we don't have white, which rules out these 3 cards. We obviously don't have black. The Gloomshrieker is a little too early right now. And we don't have 3 mana for the Presence. So, unfortunately, this is going to have to be another mulligan. This hand can't actually play any of its cards. It requires a white source off the top, really, to be functional. Maybe an Abundant Growth or Commune into that, is also a possibility, but the punish seems too severe, so I'm gonna try my luck with 5. So my luck with 5 is also fucking abysmal. So our only land this time is, in fact, the basic white, but now we have no green mana, and of course, you know, All our cards are green. We're a pretty green-heavy deck. So rather than go to 4, which there's clearly an argument for that. Okay, we're in round 2, game 1. We won the die roll again. So, this hand needs another land, a Utopia Sprawl or Wild Growth, another mana source in order to be keepable. If pretty much any of these had been that, it would have been a very strong hand. But as it is, we're going to have to mulligan because we don't... Honestly, even if one of these had been Commune with Nature, Commune with Spirits, I probably would have kept it because that would give us effectively 5 shots at top decking a land, unless it's the land with Serra Sanctum. Which would be very high odds, and I would still take that shot, I think, with a hand this good. But we've got to mulligan it, unfortunately. This hand, at first blush, looks really good, and if this Wild Growth were Utopia Sprawl, it probably would be. But unless we get a Savannah, we don't have white, which rules out these 3 cards. We obviously don't have black. The Gloomshrieker is a little too early right now. And we don't have 3 mana for the presence. So, unfortunately, this is going to have to be another mulligan. This hand can't actually play any of its cards. It requires a white source off the top, really, to be functional. Maybe an Abundant Growth or Commune into that, is also a possibility, but the punish seems too severe, so I'm gonna try my luck with 5. So my luck with 5 is also fucking abysmal. So our only land this time is, in fact, the basic white, but now we have no green mana, and of course, all our cards are green. We're a pretty green-heavy deck. So rather than go to 4, which there's clearly an argument for that, I'm going to try 5 and hope to spike a green source. If I spike a green source, this hand could be very, very good. As for what to bin, the Myriascale and the Utopia Sprawl, I think, well, the Myriascale and the Commune are probably the biggest priorities. It's probably like an Abundant Growth and Enchantress's Presence. Let's see what I do here. Okay, the Utopia Sprawl goes, okay, so I decided to keep both Abundant Growths. I guess under the argument that if we find a green source, we're casting these cards and finding another green source, and Utopia Sprawl off of curve isn't as powerful. I don't know. I guess there's an argument either way. It doesn't actually matter. Okay, so we're going to play the planes out, obviously. We have no other play. One thing we can hope is that our opponent thinks we're on Death and Taxes or something similar. Basic Plains Go tends to be Death and Taxes. They go Island, Ponder, no Shuffle, go. We draw Wild Growth, which we can't cast, of course. Man, if opponent had played like turn 1 Yavimaya, how great would that have been for us? Of course, we do draw another land, but it is Serra Sanctum. They're clearly on blue-red Delver at this point. They've got 2 threats, a substantial hand. We have no green mana. We're probably just dead no matter what we do, and playing the Serra Sanctum out reveals for certain what we are. So let's just try to preserve that information and go to game 2. On the play against Delver, I think I misspoke last round. I think I said Daze when I meant choke. On the play against Delver, I do like the chokes. I'll bring both in this case. The cast outs can all come out. I'm bringing in the touches, and I'm taking out the Hollowed Haunting, as well as 1 Gloomshrieker. The thing is, none of the cards I'm taking out are actually particularly bad against Delver. Actually, most of them are good. The only thing bad about them is that they are higher on the curve. Delver is a favorable matchup, and part of that is that our curve is so low. Most of our cards are good against them in one form or another, so I'll really just try to focus on keeping the curve a little bit slimmer. So that's really all I've done here. There are arguments for cutting any of the top-end cards, or even like cutting the Miri's Guile, not because it's high-end, but because it tends to be for a little bit grindier matchups, or matchups with Narset or things like that. But it's still just a 1-mana card, right? So it's also just nice to have when you get a land of Sithis, for example. Whereas your hand being filled with 3 or 4 drops is obviously pretty bad. So, pretty simple sideboarding, I suppose. So this hand does not have acceleration, but it does have turn 1 Paladin class off of basic planes into turn 2 Enchantress. So if they want to play a turn 1 threat, which is definitely their best opener, or even a Ponder, they have to tap out and let our Enchantress resolve. At that point, end the festivities. If they brought it in, is their only real out. And even if they have that, if we draw a land, then we're in choke territory. So I mean, this is definitely a solid hand, despite having no acceleration. So we'll lead on the Paladin class off the basic planes. This does also preserve, potentially, some confusion about what we are. You know, most people aren't very familiar with Enchantress, so fetch into basic planes Paladin class might just register as question mark, question mark, question mark. Paladin class also not being like universally played in Enchantress. Okay, we'll just go to basic planes here and play the Argothian. They did play a DRC off of Steam Vents. Steam Vents, unlike basic Mountain, tells us the choke is going to be a lot better against this person than it would have been against our last opponent. We can assume. So Enchantress gets to live a turn. They played another DRC, no land drop. We'll just cantrip a bunch. Not very complicated. One thing I will say, well, 2 things I guess I'll say. If I had drawn an Enchantress, another Argothian, I still would have continued to play enchantments rather than play out the Argothian. A lot of people, when I see them play Enchantress in other videos, tend to over-prioritize getting a second Enchantress out. I would rather start burning through the deck and building up resources. The Argothian, first of all, their only outfit at this point is a sweeper, and the sweeper would hit both. Playing the Argothian wouldn't drop more cards if they are sandbagging a Narset, and that's why they kept this 1-lander. I would generally prioritize that. The second thing is, with the Utopia Sprawl, I had a choice between green and white. Obviously, white would... I wasn't able to cast any of the cards that I had already drawn, so I was playing to the odds of being more likely to draw a 1 green mana enchantment or a commune than to draw an On Thin Ice, which obviously On Thin Ice would have been a nice draw, just being able to hit an early creature and prevent that repeated source of damage is nice. So I was punished for naming green, but I was just going with the odds. There's an argument for both white and green in that situation. Okay, they do have End the Festivities, and they mill a Daze and a Delver, which does put them pretty close. Now they just need a land to get Delirium. So let's start removing stuff. We didn't draw an Enchantress, but we did have a bunch of removal and a choke, and we still have Paladin class in play. So what we can do is just take out one of their threats now and choke them. And when it passes back, we can get rid of the other one, and we still have another removal spell. If they do draw another land, we can run the spinner out, and they'd have to deal with both the spinner and the removal. And we can also just pump Paladin class to get spinner out of lightning bolt range. So obviously, especially with the choke and them only having 1 land, pretty good position to be in. So the opponent just scoops. Okay, round 2, game 3 against Blue-Red Delver. Being on the draw, I brought one of the cast outs back in and took out one of the chokes. And I cut this spinner. I decided I wanted the Gloomshrieker back, the second Gloomshrieker back. That's a bit of an arbitrary decision, really. Spinner is also something that's, although it's not particularly high-end, the current versions of Delver don't really run anything for her to block, unless they're unflipped things. which is obviously a lot less likely to happen on the draw, because every turn they're more likely to flip the DRCs and Delvers. And she dies to Lightning Bolt, so I'll value. She's not especially valuable in this matchup. All right, so we have the good start. The good start is turn 1 acceleration off a basic forest, into turn 2 land number 2, a 2-mana Enchantress, and a 1-mana enchantment that we can cast. Plus, we have another enchantment, Enchantress, for backup. So this is a very good hand. This is the ideal opener for Enchantress, except potentially, being fetch lands, which the life loss might matter. Opponent goes Delver Go. We go Utopia Sprawl. Unlike last time, it would be really nice, last game, rather. It'd be nice if they didn't daze this. They do. So this does raise questions about what our turn 2 is going to look like. The Delver does not flip, so that's very fortunate for us. Who did they target with the bubble? They targeted us. That does sort of suggest they don't have a fetch land, I suppose, as information. Okay, they play another threat. Because we drew another Sithis, I'm going to go ahead and run her out. She doesn't get dazed, so that's good. If by some miracle they don't have removal, she can act as a wall, which no, they hit both flips. But miraculously, though, she did survive the turn, which was unexpected. And certainly nice considering how much pressure they've got going on. So we're going to be able to gain some life, which is going to be very relevant in this board state. And then we're going to try to dig into more cheap enchantments and hopefully an On Thin Ice. There's an On Thin Ice. Okay, they do have Force. They are now basically Hellbent. And we are facing a lot of damage, but we've also gained a bunch of life. I'll attack. I mean, there's no reason not to. Okay, great. We found more removal, and Utopia Sprawl was a good pickup. The DRC, when it's flipped, is obviously a slightly better target than the Delver. They're both important to get rid of. I'll get another Enchantress out and pass. We are now back up to 11, so Sithis' life gain has been very relevant, obviously. Gloomshrieker is going to be able to get back on Thin Ice, which is huge. Against a deck running white, the On Thin Ice might have gotten Prismatic Ending, or even Force of Negation against Delver, but since they forced it, that's going to make Gloomshrieker a very good pickup. It will also be a kill condition, given that their own fetches, forces, and steam vents have put them down to 12. We've also gotten some chip-ins with Sithis. Okay. I played the Abundant Growth on the fetch land. They could have wasted in response, then I would have just cracked it for card advantage. If they don't waste it in response, I'm fine if they waste it at this point, because we've got way more mana than they do. And we have Paladin class in play, so them limiting their own mana is good for us. But this game looks pretty over. They would need, something miraculous. They don't find it, and they concede. All right, let's go to the next round. We're in round 3, game 1. We're on the play again. So this is a solid hand, especially if they play a turn 1 threat, obviously. That said, the 2 weaknesses in this hand, it is a little mana heavy, but it only has 1 white mana, so we can't Sithis into Thin Ice. So if they do play a turn 1 threat and we don't draw another white source, we have to make a decision about which to value, and generally, obviously, you would want to, for example, Commune, see what else you find to set up for next turn, and then just ice the threat. In a hand like this, it's worth noting that Commune, there's some value in holding on to it to see what your natural draws are first, and letting that shape your decision. But it's definitely keepable. There's some, again, it's a little bit land heavy, but we'll obviously name white here. And we will lead on the Utopia Sprawl for a number of reasons. One, if we draw 1 green mana enchantment. If we draw an Argothian, we want it to be out of days. It's just, even though there's not necessarily a turn 2 play that utilizes it right now, like, I mean, you could Sithis into Commune, but that's kind of weak because you still haven't converted Sithis into any card advantage by casting the Commune. But even though there's no obvious turn 2 play for it, it's better to start developing your mana, getting a turn ahead in land drops, and also, you know, fixing your mana. If you do draw 1 green mana, then, you know, you still need the white mana. So, alright, Tundra promised to be for a second our first non-Delver matchup, but then that quickly changed. So, white Delver, not especially common. There was like a list for a while running Niv-Magus Elemental, but that was a couple of years ago now. Okay, so they do. Okay, I guess I should slow down. I didn't talk about our turn. So we drew the Abundant Growth, so we were able to Sithis into Abundant Growth. They removed her via Prismatic Ending, but with those extra cards, we were able to find more threats to deploy. Since they're tapped out, I'm going to use the Sithis before the Argothian. And the reason for that is that they can't remove her now, and we have extra mana. So if they don't want us just drawing a bunch of cards off of her, they have to force her, which is card advantage for us, which is, you know, this game is, this matchup is very much about resource management and just having more resources. And about, you know, being able to deploy them quickly. So that's why I ran that out in front of the Argothian. Now the Argothian is more likely to resolve, and that's harder to deal with than Sithis is, obviously. I'm not going to run out the Argothian against a Delver deck, even though they're obviously kind of an unusual Delver deck if they're on Tundra and Prismatic Ending. I'm still not going to walk our remaining Enchantress into days. You know, we do have communes to find other threats, but we can also just commune now and plan for next turn. I'll run the Thin Ice out and make sure that is days proof rather than the commune. On Thin Ice is, you know, easily one of your best cards against any kind of Delver matchup, so that's why I would rather protect the Thin Ice. We landed an Enchantress, and I played the Thin Ice, hitting the Stoneblade, which is obviously less than ideal, especially since we know they play Prismatic Ending. Because when and if they kill Thin Ice, they'll get another equipment. I don't especially care about their equipment. It does slow down their Cauldron turn, which I care about a lot more. And I just wanted to start cantripping off the Enchantress. So we found another one. I didn't really care if that one got dazed at this point, with the resource balance the way things are, and us still having a commune in hand. So I ran her out, but she did resolve. Snappy. Yeah, so there's Snappy and a Prismatic Ending. So they're running like some kind of like Stoneblade, but with Delvers, I guess. True name, yes. I mean, it looks kind of like just a traditional Stoneblade, which, you know, you obviously don't see much these days, but with Delver in it. I'm not too concerned about True Name. We'll just, although we don't have any main deck way of killing him, we can just race him very easily, especially with the life gain. And especially if he doesn't have an equipment. And we can hit the equipment, we have cast outs for that. The game is over now. There's really nothing they can do to get back in this. In fact, yeah, we just have a lethal attack, so by a lot. That was only the first strike damage. Alright, let's go to game 2. Okay, so against Delverblade, it's a little less straightforward than Delver. You'll notice that I did a fair bit of trimming, meaning just kind of cutting the fourth copy of various cards like Abundant Growth, Commune, and even Sithis, just of the mind that, you know, with swords, most likely prismatic endings and snapcasters, I'm sure they have tons of removal. They probably even have a Caracas in there. And then I'm also not sure about cutting the On Thin Ices because it is a Delver deck, but it depends a lot whether their game plan is going to lean more heavily into the Delver part of the strategy or the Stoneblade part, because against Stoneblade, Thin Ice is not especially strong. Like, it doesn't hit True Name. Hitting Stoneblade, like we saw, has a lot of risk inherent in it. You can hit the Germ token, of course, and that's good, but then, you know, you are taking damage. So what I've done is brought in 2 of the touches for 2 of the Thin Ices. The touches can also hit their artifacts, including their equipment. I brought in 1 Doomwake for the True Names. And the 2 chokes, because the choke I'm pretty sure I will want because it's a slower deck generally than Delver is. So it's a little bit of a diversification situation where we're kind of trying to fit in a little bit of this and that because we're not quite sure what their game plan is going to be exactly. So we want to have a variety of tools available. There is also some argument for diversifying in a sense, especially like the Thin Ices, because they could be running Meddling Mage. So this hand obviously only has 1 land, and then it has 2 very late game. It has like both the late game cards that we have for this game, but the remaining 5 are very strong, right? These 4 will really be able to take us through the early game, and then be able to deploy the Enchantress presence as a threat that needs to be dealt with, and by then, you know, with half-decent draws, we should be in a position turn 4 or 5 for these cards to start being relevant as well. So we need to hit land drops, obviously, but we do have Guile and Commune to help with that. Okay, another Commune is okay. We'll name green here. Because next turn we want to be able to double Commune or Commune plus Guile if need be. Okay, we found a land. So I think we will just deploy the presence. Now obviously that could walk into Daze here, which I mentioned in game 1. If they have Daze, you know, obviously that's unfortunate. But I wanted to make sure that I was using my mana efficiently. And I could have done that by getting a like a Savannah, still having white mana, and then casting like double Commune Guile. But I want to actually start deploying things to the board for them to deal with, given that they're threatening a Cauldron. Okay, now our mana situation is sorted. Okay, well, we got Wastelanded, so I guess not. We are facing down a Cauldron, which is pretty scary. I'm going to go ahead and deploy the Haunting here. We definitely, like, they might have drawn Daze in the past couple turns, but we need to erase this Cauldron. That's a very pressing concern. So part of the way we can do that is Haunting, which gets forced. So we need to find removal very quickly. Okay, there's the removal. Our Gloomshrieker trades with a Stone Forge. Neither of those, it's card neutral. I'm going to deploy the Guile, but I'm going to hold on to the Doomwake. I don't want to run it out against the Swords to Plowshares deck and just have it die. I'm saving him for when they've played a 1 toughness creature that I can kill, whether that's True Name or Delver. I'll take either one at this point. And I can use the Utopia Sprawl for black if I don't want to crack that fetch. I'll play the Spinner. I'd rather, you know, well, in theory I'd like to be able to hold her, but Okay, there's a true name. And we know the Doomwrake's going to resolve. Right, we had to use the Utopia Sprawl because our bio got wastelanded. The Argothian obviously a good draw, but I valued, given that we're at 6, playing the Doomwrake Giant over the Argothian. It's unlikely they play Lightning Bolt, but I'm just not comfortable being that low on life if I can help it. The Destiny Spinner means that our Argothian will resolve unless they have exactly Swords to Plowshares plus Force of Will blue card. Which actually, yeah, well, it's possible. The known card was Cauldron, but unlikely. It resolves. We'll play Touch. It's really just an enchantment at this point, since we don't want to hit the Cauldron with it, because that means that if they Prismatic Ending the Touch, or Teferi the Touch, do anything to it, they get their Germ token back, whereas right now they'd have to play like a Flicker Wisp or something, or like bounce it with Teferi and redeploy it somehow. So I definitely don't want to hit the Cauldron. I'll just hit the Delver, but put the Doomwake above it on the stack, so the Doomwake will resolve first and just kill it the normal way. Get some damage in. They do have Swords to Plowshares, only one. And they valued the Spinner more than the Doomwake, which I think is interesting, considering that if that's true, then maybe they shouldn't have deployed the Delver. I'm not saying it's wrong to value it more. Okay, here comes Snappy. Now, obviously hitting Snapcaster with On Thin Ice is like even worse than hitting Stoneblade, but we need to start cycling. You don't know these days how much of a clock you're on. Now, while we're okay in life, what I mean by a clock is like I'm worried about them drawing into a Narset or Hullbreacher. And so I want to try to close the game before that happens, or at least establish, get more cards in hand before that happens. Okay, unfortunately we're flooding out again. Okay, luckily we found another enchantment. It is another Enchantress effect, so we actually have to be kind of careful about the number of cards that we play, since we could deck. Okay, I ran out the Choke to see if they have the Force. They don't, so we drew the other Destiny Spinner. Next turn, we'll go for the kill. I mean, technically we have lethal on board anyway with double Paladin class Argothian, but just to be sure. Okay. Things were a little bit scary just before the end there, when we drew a bunch of land and Argothians in a row, because we didn't find an enchantment. But once we found an enchantment, we were able to go off. All right, next round. Okay, we're in round 5, game 1. On the draw, Paladin class is a much less impressive turn 1 play, because generally they're going to be ahead in mana, obviously. But we do have a turn 1 play. We have a turn 2 Enchantress. If we think they're on a blue deck and they leave mana open, we can play a Spinner instead, and then the turn after we can maybe go like Paladin class into Argothian. So like we can grind out a fair deck with this hand against any kind of actual opposing threat, unless like Destiny Spinner blocks it, we'd be in trouble. But I'm going to keep, just because we are 4-0, so we're likely to be against a fair blue matchup of some kind. Opponent mulligans to 6. Goes turn 1 Thoughtseize, that's scary. Off a Swamp. So it's possible that this isn't fair blue. Or it could be. Black and Thoughtseize have become a lot more playable in fair decks recently, so it's still possible. And Faithless Looting suggests that no, okay, it's Reanimator. And there's the Grizzlebrand. Alright, they did Exhume, so we got back our Argothian. We had a chance, like, if that turn we had drawn into an enchantment that had drawn us into Onto Nice, or if we had just drawn it Onto Nice, like, we might have had a chance. But as it is, we're just kind of dead here. We can bring out the spinner, and that's a turn. That's one card too late there. And hope that if they just have one Archon, we can sacrifice the spinner. Archon of Cruelty, well, it doesn't bury us as much as like older cards like Tidespout Tyrant would. It's also just like really obnoxious because it can kill Argothian and Enchantress. Why did we, hold on, why did we sacrifice the, oh, I was hoping at this point that they would do something foolish, like, that would allow me to ice the Archon and attack with the spinner, which wasn't a great plan, but I mean, I think, you know, we're pretty much dead here no matter what we do. The time where we were in this game was really just that one turn that we had to draw Onto Nice. Okay, and the game's over. And that's Archon number 2. So sideboarding in this matchup, as you might imagine, is not terribly complicated. The 4 ley lines, the 3 touches, and the Caracas can all come in. The Paladin classes are pretty useless. Destiny Spinner is not as good as it used to be before they had Archon, by which I mean creatures just used to be better against them because they were not so easy for them to get rid of. And you could, if they were reliant on an Exhume to reanimate their Grizzlebrand or what have you, you would have some opportunity potentially to attack, and, you know, because they're using their life as a resource heavily, that could potentially steal you a game. That's not as effective anymore, so there is an argument for taking out spinners. That said, of course, you do need kill conditions. The Guile's a bit slow here, and I'll just shave the Abundant Growth, and then a land for Caracas. We don't really need extra land per se. We will keep this hand since it does have turn. It has a ley line in the opening, and then it has a reasonable plan to try to close out the game before they find an answer to that. So we'll roll with this. Opponent does not mull. So that's good. Generally, you know, if they don't know for sure what your sideboard plan is, they might not mull into hate or an answer to Leyline. So we do have to raise that. Okay, there goes. The Thoughtseize hits the Destiny Spinner since the card we drew off the Abundant Growth with the was the Sithis. There was an argument for getting a dual land with that fetch. I probably should have done. I'll just play the Thin Ice into an empty board. I just want to get ahead in resources in front of a Serenity or whatever their hate card is. Dig into a cast out. The Underground Sea, notably, tells us they probably run Show and Tell. That's generally the reason for that in Reanimator, as a sideboard plan against this kind of graveyard hate. And they are at 3 mana. But that said, Show and Tell as a sideboard plan for them isn't very reliable. It's an A+B combo in a deck that doesn't have any real library manipulation besides Faithless Looting, which in the face of Leyline can't flashback, obviously. And we'll obviously chip in for whatever damage we can with Sithis here. And again, I'll play the touch just into an empty board. Like, there's some value to keeping it as a surprise, but we need to draw cards again and get ahead on resources. Hopefully find another Destiny Spinner and be able to close out the game quickly. Okay. A lot of lands, obviously. Alright, there's stuff. Okay, that's a Gloomshrieker, which means we have Spinner in hand for next turn. We also have Hallowed Haunting, although, well, Hallowed Haunting's also, I was going to say it's a little bit late, but it does mean we could make, like, if they play Serenity this turn, we could make a bunch of Angels. It's also worth noting if they do Show and Tell at this point, they only get 1 draw activation. And we do have Gloomshrieker that can get past a Grizzlebrand, if it's the only blocker. Okay, let's go to game 3. Game 3, the sideboard plan doesn't change at all. So this opening hand is pretty medium, and it doesn't have, like, it's playable, but it doesn't have Leyline. So we will mull. There's Leyline. This hand's a little bit more sus. Like, it does have 2 1-mana plays. It can find land to activate, to turn on these other cards, basically. And obviously it has Leyline. So we will keep. Wild Growth. They cast out, or they unmask us, pitching a Reanimate, and they hit the Commune, which is interesting, and then they Thoughtseize the cast out. So I mean, this, in fairness, does read very much like an incoming show and tell or something. But so we drew our Gothian, which means that even though they know about the Enchantress's presence, I will still play it because this is our only enchantment. Assuming that they spend another turn not doing anything, we get an extra draw off the presence. So unfortunately, in their remaining cards, they did have their A+B combo. Notably, we do have double Enchantresses, so if we draw a Utopia Sprawl, Wild Growth, a Commune, an Abundant Growth above all would be great. Unfortunately, I guess we did cut too. So maybe these could have been the spinners. No, that doesn't make sense either. Unfortunately, we draw, our lands were just the basics, and we didn't have access to dual lands, so this card is dead. If we'd had a chance to try to draw into a Caracas or on Thin Ice or touch the Spirit Realm here, we'd still be in this game, but them getting an attack step with Grizzlebrand while we have a dead card in hand is pretty much a death knell here. I think that, we win this game 3 the majority of the time. They had double. I mean, obviously, if they're playing white, they have answers to enchantments, but and they just hardcast Archon. They have to answer Leyline or get around Leyline somehow. And then, like, if the show and tell plan is their plan, they have to also have answers to the card, like the ability to pick apart our hand. So they needed multiple things, and they did have them. But I do think, just having 4 Leylines, I feel favored post board. Obviously, the fact that you're just kind of an auto loss game 1 is still makes it a very rough matchup. But let's go to the next round. We are in round 6. It's game 1. We are on the draw. This hand is okay. It's very good against Delver, for example. It has On Thin Ice, Paladin class, Destiny Spinner. Even if this Utopia Sprawl got dazed, we'd have the ability to buy you into Abundant Growth, redraw. And then we are in round 6. It's game 1. We are on the draw. This hand is okay. It's very good against Delver, for example. It has On Thin Ice, Paladin class, Destiny Spinner. Even if this Utopia Sprawl got dazed, we'd have the ability to buy you into Abundant Growth, redraw, and then Thin Ice off of the basic forest, and then the Spinner or the Paladin class to help force spells through. So I'm going to keep it. Horizon Canopy Mana Bomb. So this is not Delver. there's a new variant of lands going around. A land is an okay pickup, but hopefully we draw an Enchantress soon. That runs 4 copies of Mulch and 4 copies of some other card that's very, if not identical, at least very similar. I can't recall what it's called. And then they play for Mana Bond, which generally the lands has moved away from, and they get to just dump their hand into play, which is potentially powerful, especially with Field of the Dead. They can have, with their best hands, they can have very early, like, large numbers of zombies. It does require, like, a number of things coming together for them, but it's an interesting deck for sure. And there it is. Okay, so they had, let's see, and Tabernacle for the sweet synergy. So, I mean, the thing is, here's what they need. They need Mana Bond, and they need Field of the Dead, and they need 6 separate lands that all have different names. So that's actually not incredibly likely, as well as Mulch. Did I mention that? Yeah. So they did have it this time, and unfortunately they also had Light from the Loam, so this is a pretty perfect start for them. Whereas our start is missing, it's not really prepared for this, it's missing an Enchantress. What we can do is just redraw, try to find an Enchantress. No. We'd have a blocker. This can kill 1 zombie a turn. They got to Light from the Loam. They only found 1 land. Okay, so I mean, this hand is actually pretty bad against what they're doing, and we didn't draw into any kind of Enchantress that might dig us out. Like Sithis would have been ideal to gain life, which will help keep us ahead in this race. It's also notable that, you know, like traditionally Enchantress would be running Elephant Grass in place of Haunted Ice, which would obviously be much, much better here. However, Haunted Ice is just generally better against the meta right now. Elephant Grass would be, you know, just enormous. Like, they would be forced to, well, I guess they found the other Passaggio anyway, so just everything was coming up in their favor, so. But we would have multiple grasses, so I don't know. Anyway, let's go to the next game. So this is my first time actually playing against this deck. Paladin class and Haunted Ice both seem really weak. Like, they could be on, they're probably on some, I don't think that, one thing is that the 8 Mulch list I don't think have really solidified on a specific deck list. So I think there's variance in like how reliant or how much they even use the Merit Lage plan. So there's some argument for On Thin Ice for Merit Lage, but it's obviously quite insufficient against zombie tokens. I brought in the Doomwake Giants, which, you know, traditionally are not a good card at all against lands, but this list being so much more reliant on Field of the Dead makes Doomwake seem a lot better. The Ley Lines seem very good. I think that a significant number of their hands are going to be really bad without access to Life from the Loam. And let's see, the Caracas can come in just as an out to Merit Lage, and an additional mana source just doesn't seem that bad against them. They are running Wasteland and probably some number of ports or Ghost Quarters. What else? Oh yeah, I brought in the touches because they can be used against Merit Lage if that's their plan, and they're better there than on Thin Ice because they're instant speed. But they can also be used defensively. That's another virtue of Touch the Spirit Realm, is you can bring them in matchups where you're not sure whether on Thin Ice is going to be any good, because it can be used defensively to like protect a Sithis, for example, from a Force of Figure. The Spinners seem pretty bad as well. My kill conditions now are going to be the Hollow Taunting, the Doomwake Giants, and the Gloomshriekers to recur those as needed. Yeah. So let's get going. This hand has very solid mana, in that we have all our land drops. We can commune to find more land or to find more enchantments. It's not God Acceleration, which is a bit of a concern, and it also doesn't have an opening leyline. But I think I want to keep this hand. Obviously, a better hand would have Acceleration, which we can draw into in fairness, or Leyline. So turn 1 Soul Guide Lantern, not very impressive opening. Let's just lead on the Argothian. Drop of Honey. So what we can do here actually is, so if they hadn't played Drop of Honey, which I'm pretty sure is a one of, by the way, what we could have done was Sithis into Utopia Sprawl, which would have been better, drawn us more cards, and gained us some life. But what we can do here is Utopia Sprawl, name white, play the Sithis and the Karakas, and then just bounce the Sithis when there's no creatures in play, and then Drop of Honey will die. And it will trade with the Argothian, but we've drawn some cards from it, so... I wanted to do that before their land drop because, well, I guess they would just be killing their token, but they would have that option. Deafening Silence also, by the way, probably one of. Actually, it is. I looked at this person's list. A little annoying. It makes the Commune certainly a lot worse. We'll go ahead and get our Haunting out. That's not off the Winding Way, they already had that. So, one thing about, so they do, this is a deck that runs Boseiju Life from the Loam. But the issue is that that really shuts off their, any mana denial aspect that they've got going on. If they didn't have this one of Deafening Silence, them hitting Hallowed Haunting wouldn't be that great for them, because we would just be able to go off hard this turn. I'm actually not that scared of the combination of Boseiju and Life from the Loam. Again, this is, you know, if they didn't have this as well, or if we had an answer to this in hand, it would be different. I really want to get this Leyline into play in front of a Life from the Loam. Unfortunately, this Deafening Silence is slowing us down substantially. And part of that, I guess, is also that we took out the spinners. Like against, for instance, Death and Taxes, when they bring it in, I would leave in the spinners against Death and Taxes because they do a good job blocking the ground. But having fewer creature enchantments to play does make it a little more obnoxious here. We are able to play some enchantments through this. And that Mulch, which is like their fourth Mulch, hits Ghost Quarter Tropical Island. They fetch Wasteland. Now they do get a bunch of zombies, which is kind of scary. We are at a high life. So see, like... I think I probably should have gotten the basic planes there. Again, you know, if they didn't have this Deafening Silence, actually, this would actually not be so scary, because we could just play the Leyline, right? Well, let's talk through it. We're going to my turn. So we can fetch up the Bayou. I think I make a mistake by playing Cast Out here. Yeah, this is a big mistake. I should have waited till their end step to Cast Out. I can save the Cast Out for their turn, obviously, and use it during their end step after they've discarded to Mana Bond, and that way they don't have a Boseiju in hand, and we get a turn without the Deafening Silence in play, and that's a lot better than what I'm about to do. So this is definitely a misplay. Whereas if we play the Leyline, right, we fetch the Bayou with the Misty, we play the Leyline, Maybe we play the second Sithis, it doesn't particularly matter. They can Life from the Loam. Those 3 cards will be exiled. They can get back Boseiju, let's say Ghost Quarter and Saga. They can discard the Boseiju to destroy the Leyline, but then the Boseiju and the Life from the Loam are both exiled. And they've only got the 1 Loam, so that would have been much, much better than just playing this cast out. And like, I guess I was thinking like I could try to go off here, but I don't have enough mana to really take advantage of it. And I'm getting life, but like we can afford to take this hit from the zombies and aim for next turn, trying to find a Doomwake, which I think was part of my plan. And knowing that they have Ghost Quarter, I think I should have put this Utopia Sprawl on one of these, even though like I could play, oh no, I guess because the Deafening Silence is going, so that's another mistake that I'm forced into by playing the cast out this early. So that turn really should have been a Leyline turn. Because they can also Boseiju this Doomwake now. So, and now they found another Life from the Loam that turn where they would end another Boseiju, which would have been exiled if I had played the Leyline on the correct turn. So, this game was definitely a learning process. Even though the game doesn't look over, I think this is actually a point where we're starting to face getting locked. And because they had the second Boseiju, like I was able to touch to protect the Doomwake from the first Boseiju, but the second one was lights out. And I also should have played that Gloomshrieker instead of the Sithis, I think, last turn. Maybe get back, I don't know, Utopia Sprawl, or no, maybe the Sarah Sanctum. So this is gonna be our last turn with black mana. Unfortunately, because they've got recurring Ghost Quarter and Wasteland, they're gonna waste our Bayou, and they're gonna be able to keep us off this abundant growth. And even if we draw into another one because of the Deafening Silence, we're locked, and we're also down to 15 cards left in deck without Destiny Spinner to close the game quickly. So I think it really comes down to I do think Leyline is very good against them, and I think that I underestimated the mid-game potential of Leyline. Like, I was thinking, I wasn't prioritizing it very highly because, you know, I was like, well, they've already got all this stuff going on. But I think it would definitely have been correct to run out the Leyline there and block. Put them down to just top decking every turn, you know, drawing a random land, getting a zombie, and passing. Notably, if we were running Emrakul in the sideboard, it would also make a big difference since we're being Ghost Quartered out, obviously. And would allow us to get black mana that they couldn't stop because we could just, you know, fetch the Bayou again. I mean, it looks like this list isn't running crop rotation or bog, so. So yeah, so part of this is familiarity. Part of this is that, and part of the lack of familiarity is also that there's not necessarily a settled list. Like some of the lists that I've seen running this 8 mulch plant are in fact on crop rotation as well. And like Force of Vigor is another card. Like I was gonna say crop rotation, like stuff like that doesn't really make sense when you got Mana Bond, because like you're trying to empty your hand every turn. So you know, stuff that operates on the opponent's turn doesn't seem very good. It was good practice anyway, a good learning experience. We are unfortunately now 4-2. Let's go to the next round. Okay, we are in round 7. This is game 1. We are on the draw. This hand is pretty solid. I mean, we've got Acceleration and Enchantress. We've got Control, Commune to dig for more of whatever it is that we need. Chat glitching. Okay, so we're against Delver again. We will lead with Basic Forest, Utopia Sprawl on white. No, actually we can lead with Wild Growth now that we've drawn that. Just because if it gets dazed, it's more expendable. And we can still tap the Bayou to Utopia Sprawl, the Basic Forest, name white, and operate that way. Okay. I'll spread them out. I'll start with the spinner. Okay. They actually force the spinner. I'll go for the ice. They're down to 2 cards. If they daze it, you know, they're incredibly low on resources. They're already low on resources. Okay, here comes the Delver. Alright, 2 cards in hand. Carpet. The Carpet is to test for Force of Will. It didn't get forced. So we will go with the Enchantress. Okay, they did have a force. Alright, well now they're hellbent. We have a removal spell. They reveal Force of Will. They can't cast it. Gloomshrieker, great pickup. We can Gloomshrieker into Presence. We can take 1 more hit off this Delver. They could theoretically force this turn if they drew a blue card. But we will have, you know, a lot more cards than they do. Okay, no blue card. Unfortunately, we drew lands, so that's a little scary. We do have a clock, technically. But if they top deck a Murktide, you know, we'll suddenly be in a lot of trouble unless we draw an enchantment. I don't fetch here to thin because there's 10 is a lot better than 9 versus a deck with Lightning Bolt and Delver. Right? And honestly, I would probably not even fetch in the face of a Wasteland. Okay, more lands. Draw go. Okay, opponent finds a Ponder, which probably means action is coming this turn. And there's the Murktide. Pretty scary. 2-mana 8/8. Seems fair. So we absolutely have to draw an enchantment now, and being at 9 or 10 doesn't matter anymore, so I'll thin. Okay. We found an Abundant Growth. We found the Cast Out. They didn't have the blue card for the Force, miraculously. We are still drawing lands. But we did find the removal spell at least. This is a lot of land. This is, what, 9 land and 10 non-land? So... Okay. enchantment territory. Alright, there's Sithis. Thank God for that. Alright. Okay, now we can get above 9. Alright, opponent concedes. This time I decide to take out, to leave out the chokes, to bring in the 3 extra removal spells. I'll take out the Cast Out, the Haunting, and I'll actually take out one of the Paladin classes. Under the argument they're just worse in the draw. Again, there's a set of things you can take out, and generally the things that you want to consider bringing in are the touches and the chokes. Against certain lists, Doomwake has an argument as well. So this hand obviously would lose to Stifle, but that's kind of fallen off of popularity, and it plays obviously really, really well off 1 or 2 mana, you know, and even doesn't mind Daze so much, so we'll keep it and see how it goes. Okay, so no Stifle. That's good. That's a pretty decent draw. I think I'm going to play a Wild Growth here. So like I said earlier at some point, Sithis, you know, I could have played the Utopia Sprawl on white and played Sithis next turn, but that would be foolish unless I drew a land, a green producing land, in my opinion, because then it will just get lightning bolted and won't get any value. I'm going to set myself up for a double spell next turn, Commune plus Sprawl if I don't find a land, maybe Destiny Spinner if I do. I'll have options in front of me. So opponent doesn't flip the Delver, they do play a DRC with Ponder. They don't shuffle, so presumably this Delver will flip. Okay, land is great. What we can do here is get a basic forest, Utopia Sprawl, name white, Sithis. Now, if they force this, they're down to 2 cards. Okay, they don't. We get to gain a life, which is going to be important, and draw cards. Okay, another removal spell and another land drop is good. Okay, the Delver flips, unsurprisingly. Expressive Iteration, okay. They are 1 type away from Delirium. Wasteland. So the Sithis actually gets to live, which is incredible for us and really bad for them. And also it blocks their DRC, so it gained that extra life as well. So I mean that's probably a death knell in this matchup. If the Sithis gets to live a turn and I have anything at all going on in my hand, that's pretty bad for them. So I'll play the Spinner, which will make this touch uncounterable to Daze. I could have attacked the Sithis. Yeah, I just didn't. Okay, they found another blue source. Okay, here comes Lightning Bolt. Alright, Sithis is dead, and now this is flipped. Okay, Gloomshrieker. Again, we do have Spinner. And draw cards, gain life, attack. What do they put on top of Sanctuary? Expressive Iteration. Okay, we'll lead with Paladin class. They bounce the Sithis. Okay, that does slow us down. If we find a Sanctum, notably, we could pump the class and get like Spinner out of Bolt range. They're out of Delirium, so we could get, you know, Sithis out of Unholy Heat range. We do want to answer this Murktide. We're at 13, but that's not a ton of life, so let's ice it, and that's it. Okay, opponent concedes to that. Alright, okay, round 8, final round, game 1. We are on the draw, so we won the first 4 dice rolls and lost the second 4. This hand is pretty solid. We can just name green with Utopia Sprawl. If anything happens to that, we do have Commune to try to find more land if we don't draw into it naturally. We have a second land drop, but it's it's the Sanctum, so it's questionable in the early game. It does mean that this hand could be faster as a consequence of having Sanctum. We have our Enchantress, we have Answers, and again we have Commune to find whatever it is that we need Commune to find. So we will keep. Opponent mulls to 6. Volcanic Island, Ponder. So this could be a few things. It could obviously be a blue-red Delver. It could be Sneak and Show, or even some kind of Storm deck with Volcanic Island, Ponder. It could likewise be some kind of Jeskai control or Grixis control even. Grixis control gaining a lot of popularity recently. Well, Utopia Sprawl, okay, it gets through. We'll name white since we drew another forest. Otherwise we would have named green. It's usually a mistake to name black early, because black is generally just colorless mana. Even though, potentially that could allow us to cast a Gloomshrieker when we find it, but we have other outs like Abundant Growth, more Utopia Sprawls, Fetches, or Commune, if that happens. And that's another benefit of there are other lists I've toyed with that are more dependent on tertiary colors. This list having pretty much green-white does mean the mana is a lot more stable. Okay, she dies, but she did her job. Unholy Heat suggests that this is in fact Delver, and they just didn't have an early threat, which is pretty good for us and pretty bad for them. We found another Enchantress off the Sithis. Opponent does not find a land drop or a usable card off the Expressive Iteration, notably, so that iteration was just 2 mana, draw a card, or I guess Ponder. So basically a 2 mana Ponder, I suppose. They did exile their main deck Pyroblast. That obviously would be very bad against us. Yeah, I mean, we're going to go for the Enchantress. See what happens. Okay, it meets a force. There was an argument for playing out the land. I didn't want the Sanctum to get wastelanded. They could be just sandbagging a wasteland in hand. But I don't know. It's probably worth it to get the Commune out of days, or to get the get the Commune out of days range. In fairness, this is pretty late in the day at this point in the tournament. Okay, so we'll lead with Destiny Spinner, and we'll ice this dragon. We'll draw a card, and we'll continue to hold on to our Sanctum. Okay, there's another Enchantress. Okay, we'll play her on days. And we'll hold on to our 2 removal spells and our Sanctum. Like Delver, they're unlikely to be doing something main deck that would punish us for trying to play this a little bit more conservatively. And these 3 cards are all pretty valuable. I don't want to just toss them in for no value. Just a cycle. So I mean, there's something to hit. They're 1 card type away from getting Delirium. Okay, always lead with the free spells. Okay, and there's the Sithis, and they scoop. They don't have an answer ready for that, and we've also got removal. So let's go to game 2. So against this opponent, part of this is just maybe a response to the way that they played the last hand, which was probably just forced. But if it's true that they're a less aggressive player and not just, that's the hand they had, then bringing in 1 choke looks better. So it'll be the 3 touches and 1 choke for the 2 cast outs, the Haunting and the Paladin class. I mean, I'm unlikely to regret bringing in the choke. It's a question of whether, the removal spell is better, even if it's a subpar removal spell. So this hand is interesting. It has a lot of cards that are good against them, but it doesn't have acceleration and it doesn't have white mana. This would be a much easier keep on the play. It's a bit more of an iffy keep on the draw, but I don't want to go to 5. Opponent also mulch to 6. Okay, turn 1 DRC. Okay, that's a good draw. Test them for days. Okay. Okay, that's a lot of threats. Slow down. Okay, opponent played three threats here. They just played DRC, Delver with 2 cards in hand. So they're playing very aggressively. Since they're playing so aggressively, first of all, they're unlikely to have Force of Will plus blue card in hand, so I'm just going to run out the Enchantress. They're also, like, just threatening a huge clock. I can't afford to take the turn it would take to, like, try to spinner first or whatever. I need to get my engine going, and I need to find white mana ASAP to deal with some of these threats, and hopefully gain some life as well. They lightning bolt to trigger the DRC. They mill a wasteland. They flip, showing Force of Will. So I have Force of Will and an unknown. Okay, we found the abundant growth. That's great. That's great for us. It's unlikely to be countered. We can run out the Destiny Spinner first. Oh, Utopia's is probably even better. Okay, so we can take one of these Delvers out of the board, off the board. Oh, okay, so I think this was a mistake. I guess I was thinking about the life gain. We could have led with the spinner instead and be certain to have iced something. And then we'd be looking at, you know, if they trigger Delirium and have a lightning bolt somehow, we're dead. Whereas that's still true here. If we get a turn and they don't have removal for Sithis. I don't know, I guess maybe this does make sense, because if they're down to very few cards in hand, one of which is Force of Will. If they don't have if it's not a blue card though, like, is it another DRC or a lightning bolt? Okay, this does buy the Force of Will, which the spinner would also have done, but then we'd have Sithis next turn. So I don't know. I think this might have been better to run out the spinner. Okay, Carpet, obviously a great pickup. That does mean that next turn we can probably just cast the Sithis again with the Gloomshrieker. Okay, that's 4 damage coming in. They are Hellbent with 1 random card. Okay, we'll play the Carpet, go to the second main. We do have white and abundant growth, so I'll probably just name green here. Okay, we do get a chance to gain a life for sure, even if the Sithis dies. But I mean, if I have Lightning Bolt, they could just kill us, so... Yeah, so I mean, we're still dead to Lightning Bolt, I believe, here. Okay, I'm trying to find any 1 mana... Because we found Abundant Growth off the Sithis, we can try to get out of Lightning Bolt range here, in which case they would need to flip the DRC and have Lightning Bolt, or have Double Bolt, I suppose. Okay, we did. We found a Wild Growth. So now we're at 7, that's big. And we found a removal spell for this, for next turn if we survive. They did have Lightning Bolt. So it's a really good thing that we did that. Pretty scary. So now they've got instant land. So if they find a Ponder, and then the Ponder or the Expressive Iteration reveals a creature, then we're dead. But they don't, so we got it. Alright, so that is a 6-2 finish. 4 of those wins were against Blue-Red Delver, 1 was against Delverblade, 1 was against 8-Cast, and then we lost to 8-Loam and to Reanimator. Both of which I think, even though we got 2-0'd by the lands list, I think part of that was just a learning experience. I think in the round tournament metagame, an Enchantress list like this is a pretty reasonable choice. We've seen it's obviously very good against Blue-Red Delver, which is a huge consideration, and it can play against most of the decks that you expect people to play if they're playing competitively to win. In leagues recently, I found it an unbelievably hostile metagame. In leagues, pretty much every matchup has been combo or a Hull Breacher Days Undoing deck. I don't know per se the reason that it's so popular right now. It is an extremely powerful combo, I mean, so I understand that. There's less Blue-Red Delver in leagues, and I think that that's probably a very difficult matchup for the Hull Breacher decks. I wouldn't really advise playing this in MTGO leagues. In your local metagame, of course, you know, I don't know. It depends on what's around. It's still very good against the fair blue decks, against most of the fair non-blue decks for that matter. I do think it's generally going to be good against any kind of Merit Lage deck. We did lose to 8 Mulch. Again, I think that that's probably a favorable matchup if we learned a little bit more about it and how to play it. Okay, thanks for watching. Signing off.